Welcome, historians and strategists, to a story that transcends millennia, echoing with the thunder of ambition and the whispers of betrayal. Our journey begins not on a distant battlefield, but within the hallowed marble halls of Rome itself. This was the undisputed heart of the ancient world, a city that embodied power, progress, and seemingly unyielding dominion. At its zenith stood Gaius Julius Caesar, a figure of monumental stature, whose name alone commanded empires and shaped destinies. He was a military genius, a shrewd politician, and a charismatic leader, whose conquests stretched Rome's influence to unprecedented heights. Caesar seemed invincible, a man blessed by the gods, orchestrating the grand narrative of Western civilization with an iron will. Yet, even the mightiest oaks can be felled, not by the storm's fury, but by unseen currents gnawing at their roots. How, we must ask, could the world's most dominant man, a living legend, be brought to his knees? The answer lies not in external conflict or a vast opposing army, but in the insidious machinations of those closest to him. This is the untold saga of an unthinkable internal threat, a clandestine plot born from the very elite he commanded. Our historical records reveal a shocking truth. Caesar was undone by the betrayal of 60 senators, his own peers and supposed allies. It was an ultimate inversion of power, a collective conspiracy that redefined the very concept of treachery within the Republic. Through meticulous analysis of ancient texts and expert interpretations, we shall peel back the layers of this seismic event. We will delve into the motives, the strategic orchestrations, and the chilling audacity of those who plotted against a god. This series promises a deep dive into the psychological warfare, the hidden agendas, and the profound human drama behind Caesar's downfall. Prepare to witness the pivotal moment that irrevocably reshaped Rome, and by extension, the course of all Western civilization. Ismo Seco. We begin our journey not in the halls of conspiracy, but amidst the turbulent currents of the late Roman Republic, a society teetering on the precipice of profound change. The once proud republic, forged in the fires of communal defense, now groaned under the weight of internal strife, rampant corruption, and an ever-widening chasm between its social classes. Powerful aristocratic families, the Optimates, fiercely guarded their ancestral privileges, viewing any challenge to their established order as a direct assault on Rome itself. Meanwhile, the Populares, a faction championed by figures like Gaius Marius and later Caesar, sought to leverage the will of the plebeians and equites for political advancement and social reform. This era was a crucible, shaping ambitious men who understood that true power now flowed not from senatorial decree alone, but from popular support and, crucially, military might. Into this volatile mix stepped Gaius Julius Caesar, a man of noble lineage, yet initially lacking the vast wealth and entrenched networks of his rivals. His early career was marked by strategic alliances, notably the First Triumvirate, with the immensely wealthy Crassus and the celebrated general Pompey Magnus. This powerful, unofficial alliance allowed Caesar to secure a monumental command: the governorship of Cisalpine Gaul, Transalpine Gaul, and Illyricum. This was his grand stage, an opportunity he seized with both hands, transforming a frontier province into the launchpad for an empire. For nearly a decade, from 58 to 50 BC, Caesar unleashed his military genius upon the disparate Gallic tribes, a campaign of unprecedented scale and brutality. He methodically conquered vast swathes of barbarian lands, extending Rome's dominion far beyond its traditional boundaries and securing immense personal glory. Our historical records confirm Caesar's tactical brilliance, his audacious river crossings, and his mastery of siege warfare, as exemplified at Alesia. At Alesia, his legions, outnumbered by Vercingetorix's forces within and a massive relief army without, constructed an engineering marvel: a double line of fortifications. This unprecedented dual circumvallation and contravallation allowed Roman forces to besiege one army while simultaneously defending against another. Expert military analysis reveals Caesar's innovative use of combined arms, the disciplined efficacy of his legions, and his unparalleled ability to inspire loyalty among his troops. The Gallic Wars were not merely conquests. They were a vast training ground, forging an unshakable bond between Caesar and his battle-hardened veterans. They bled for him, they marched for him, and in turn, he ensured their welfare, earning a devotion few Roman generals ever commanded. By the time Gaul was pacified, Caesar had amassed incredible wealth from plunder and tributes, which he used to reward his soldiers and build political influence back in Rome. He became a living legend, his name whispered with awe in the streets and feared by his rivals in the Senate. He was Rome's most successful general, but with immense power came immense fear. The traditional Roman elite, especially the conservative optimates, viewed Caesar's burgeoning popularity with growing alarm. His prolonged command in Gaul and the unswerving loyalty of his legions presented an existential threat to the Republic's fragile balance of power. As his term in Gaul neared its end, the Senate, increasingly manipulated by Pompey, who now saw Caesar as a rival, ordered him to disband his army and return as a private citizen. This was a direct challenge, a political maneuver designed to strip Caesar of his military immunity and expose him to prosecution for alleged abuses of power in Gaul. For Caesar, this was not merely a legal battle. It was a desperate struggle for his very survival, a choice between political annihilation or outright rebellion. On January 10th, 49 BC, standing on the banks of the Rubicon River, the northern boundary of Italy, Caesar faced his fateful decision. With the immortal words, "Alia iacta est," the die is cast, he led his 13th legion across the Rubicon, plunging Rome into an inevitable civil war. This audacious act was a declaration of war against the Senate and Pompey, who had become the Republic's de facto champion. The ensuing conflict was a brutal, globe-spanning struggle, pitting Rome's greatest generals against each other, dividing families and loyalties across the Roman world. Pompey, initially commanding superior forces and the backing of the Senate, abandoned Rome, retreating to Greece to raise more legions. Caesar, with his veteran legions, moved with astonishing speed, securing Italy and then pursuing Pompey across the Adriatic. The decisive confrontation came at Pharsalus in 48 BC, a battle that would forever alter the course of Roman history. Outnumbered, Caesar's tactical brilliance once again shone through, employing a hidden fourth line of infantry to outflank and decimate Pompey's cavalry. The victory at Pharsalus was absolute, shattering Pompey's army and forcing him to flee to Egypt, where he was tragically assassinated. With Pompey dead, Caesar became the undisputed master of the Roman world, yet his campaigns continued, hunting down Pompeian remnants across Africa and Spain. Having vanquished all his military opponents, Caesar returned to Rome, hailed as a conqueror and savior, but also as a dictator. His consolidation of power was swift and comprehensive. He was granted a series of extraordinary titles and offices, culminating in Dictator Perpetuo, Dictator in Perpetuity. This was an unprecedented move, effectively transforming the Republic into a thinly veiled monarchy, alarming even some of his own supporters. Caesar immediately embarked on a vast program of reforms: land redistribution for veterans, debt relief, calendar reform, and ambitious public works projects. He expanded the Senate, appointing loyalists and men from the provinces, further eroding the traditional power base of the old Roman aristocracy. While many of his reforms genuinely benefited the common people and stabilized the Republic after years of civil war, they also concentrated immense power in his hands. The Optimates, observing Caesar's monarchical tendencies, his refusal to rise in the presence of senators, his golden throne, his statues among the kings, grew increasingly terrified. They saw not a benevolent leader, but a tyrant, a new king in all but name, threatening to dismantle the very foundations of the Roman Republic they held sacred. This fear was not irrational. Historical records reveal a systematic dismantling of republican traditions in favor of centralized autocratic rule. The ideological clash was stark. The Republic's champions versus the man who had effectively usurped its power, albeit for what he claimed were Rome's best interests. This growing chasm of fear, ambition, and principle would soon erupt, setting the stage for one of history's most infamous acts of betrayal. The boundless power amassed by Gaius Julius Caesar, celebrated hero to the masses, became an unbearable burden to the very foundation of Roman liberty. Within the hallowed halls of the Senate, an insidious fear began to grip the hearts of men who cherished the ancient republic above all personal gain. At the vanguard of this growing apprehension stood Marcus Junius Brutus, a man whose illustrious lineage connected him deeply to Rome's foundational freedoms. He was admired for his integrity, a scholar-statesman whose every action seemed guided by a profound sense of civic duty and stoic principles. Yet, the affection Caesar held for him, and Brutus's own conflicting loyalty, tore at his conscience, presenting an agonizing moral quandary. Alongside Brutus was Gaius Cassius Longinus, a man of sharper edge and fiery conviction, whose animosity towards Caesar ran deep and unyielding. Cassius, a brilliant military tactician, resented Caesar's ascendancy. Seeing his personal ambition as a direct threat to the Republic he passionately championed. The other 58 senators who swelled their ranks harbored a diverse tapestry of motivations, from ideological purity to personal slights and fear of Caesar's continued rule. Yet, they were united by a singular, unwavering conviction: the sacred ideal of the Roman Republic, free from the yoke of a sole ruler. To these men, Caesar's perpetual dictatorship, his dictatorial reforms, and his very persona embodied the precise tyranny their ancestors had overthrown centuries ago. The specter of monarchy, a concept anathema to the Roman identity, loomed large, threatening to erase generations of republican tradition. Could the murder of a man, even one so powerful, ever be justified as an act of patriotism? This profound moral dilemma weighed heavily upon their souls. Their clandestine meetings were undoubtedly rife with intense philosophical debate, wrestling with the ethical costs of their desperate proposed remedy. For Brutus, especially, the path to regicide was paved with profound personal torment, challenging every principle he had ever held dear. Slowly, meticulously, the tendrils of the conspiracy began to interweave, connecting disillusioned senators who dared to whisper their forbidden fears. Anonymous notes and cautious overtures tested the waters, seeking out those whose hearts still beat for the true Roman Republic. Recruitment was a dangerous dance of trust and suspicion, each new member a potential betrayer, each shared secret a step closer to doom. The conspirators walked a tightrope, their resolve tempered by the constant dread of exposure and Caesar's formidable intelligence network. Their secret meetings unfolded in the shadows of private villas, away from prying eyes, under the cloak of night, and within trusted sanctuaries. Oaths of secrecy, perhaps not formally sworn, but understood through shared glances and desperate conviction, bound them together in a pact of life and death. With each clandestine gathering, the abstract idea of resistance solidified into a grim, meticulously crafted plan for Caesar's demise. They recognized the absolute necessity for a swift, decisive strike that would prevent any chance of Caesar rallying his loyal legions. Debates surely raged over the method. Some advocated for a public act, others for a more private, less confrontational approach. Ultimately, the Senate House itself, the very symbol of Roman governance, was chosen as the stage for their audacious, world-changing act. Then came the fateful decision of the precise timing. The Ides of March, 44 BC, a date forever etched into the annals of history. Caesar was scheduled to depart Rome for a major military campaign against the Parthians, marking his last senatorial appearance before leaving. This presented a narrow, unrepeatable window of opportunity to strike before his departure would undoubtedly cement his imperial power further. The chosen timing carried immense psychological weight, amplifying the tension as the conspirators steeled themselves for their monumental task. The audacity of attempting such an act against the most powerful man in the Roman world, surrounded by loyal guards and veteran soldiers, was breathtaking. Yet, their unwavering conviction in the righteousness of their cause, the saving of the Republic, overshadowed any personal fear. There was no turning back. The die was cast, and Rome's destiny, they believed, rested squarely upon their desperate, bloody gamble. As the dawn of the Ides approached, final preparations were made, daggers concealed, and last words perhaps exchanged among the conspirators. This was their final, desperate gamble for what they perceived as Roman liberty, a dramatic testament to their profound, albeit controversial, patriotism. But the dawn of the Ides of March, 44 BC, arrived cloaked in an unsettling quiet, a premonition that gripped the ancient city. For days, an eerie tension had settled over Rome, hinting at a rupture in the fabric of its destiny. This was the day etched into history, a moment when the Republic's future hung precariously balanced. Even Julius Caesar, renowned for his indomitable will and pragmatic disbelief in portents, was troubled. His wife Calpurnia had endured a night of terrifying visions. She dreamt of their house collapsing and Caesar bleeding out in her arms. Her desperate pleas for him to remain home, to postpone the Senate session, were fervent and uncharacteristic. The traditional augurs had also delivered grim warnings. Their sacrificed animals consistently displayed unfavorable omens, their entrails speaking of peril. Never before had the signs been so consistently dark, a chorus of divine disapproval. Caesar, a man who had faced down legions and defied impossible odds, found himself hesitating. He considered honoring Calpurnia's fears and the priest council. For a rare moment, the mighty dictator contemplated postponing the Senate meeting. Such a decision, however minor it might seem, could have profoundly altered the course of Western civilization. But the conspirators had anticipated such a possibility, a contingency carefully woven into their intricate plot. Decimus Brutus, a man Caesar considered a close friend and trusted confidant, arrived at his villa. His role was pivotal, his mission clear: to ensure Caesar's attendance. With cunning words, Brutus gently chided Caesar's apprehension. He mocked the notion of a great general being swayed by a woman's dream or the superstitions of aged priests. He reminded Caesar of the Senate's eagerness to grant him new honors, perhaps even the coveted title of King of Parthia, a strategic military objective. This was a masterful manipulation, exploiting Caesar's deep-seated pride and ambition. The Senate waited, prepared to bestow unprecedented power. Caesar, ultimately swayed by duty, ambition, and perhaps a touch of ego, dismissed the lingering doubts. He would attend. His journey to the theater of Pompey, where the Senate was convening, began with an almost processional air. Yet, within the crowds, a palpable sense of unease simmered. A Greek philosopher, Artemidorus, attempted to hand Caesar a scroll containing details of the plot. He pleaded with him to read it immediately. Tragically, Caesar, ever dismissive of personal appeals amidst pressing state business, waved him off. The scroll was placed among other petitions, unread. Upon arrival, the colossal theater of Pompey loomed, its magnificent architecture belying the sinister drama about to unfold within its curia. As Caesar ascended the steps, an almost unbearable tension permeated the air. The conspirators, strategically placed, felt the pounding of their own hearts. Inside the chamber, the stage was set. 60 men, united by a desperate conviction, positioned themselves around Caesar's gilded chair. Tilius Cimber stepped forward, his body language conveying profound earnestness, to present a petition for his exiled brother's return. This was the prearranged signal. As Simba grasped Caesar's toga, pleading with simulated desperation, other conspirators pressed in, feigning support for the petition. Caesar, growing annoyed by the clamor, attempted to push Simba away. It was then, amidst the sudden confusion, that the first blow was struck. Publius Servilius Casca, from behind, plunged his dagger into Caesar's neck. It was a glancing, clumsy wound, but the Rubicon had been crossed again, this time with blood. The chamber erupted into sheer pandemonium. Senators screamed, loyalists recoiled in horror, and Caesar, initially stunned, began to fight back. He spun around, roaring at Casca, struggling against the throng of attacking senators, a blur of daggers flashing in the light. He was a lion, cornered but still dangerous, until his gaze fell upon Marcus Junius Brutus, his beloved protege, advancing with a dagger. The moment of profound personal betrayal silenced Caesar's struggle. His immortal words, "It too, Brute. You too, Brutus," echoed a pain deeper than any blade. With a profound sigh, no longer resisting, Caesar pulled his toga over his head, accepting his fate, and fell at the foot of Pompey's statue. Botta, the cold steel withdrew, leaving behind not just a gaping wound, but an even deeper void in the heart of Rome. For a breath-holding moment, an unnatural silence descended upon the Curia of Pompey, a silence punctuated only by the drip of blood onto the marble floor. Caesar, the invincible, the divine, lay sprawled and lifeless at the foot of Pompey's statue, betrayed by those he had trusted, his toga stained crimson. The very air hung heavy with the magnitude of the deed. Then, from the ranks of the conspirators, a shout erupted, raw and desperate. "Liberty!" Brutus and Cassius, their hands still slick with the dictator's blood, raised their daggers aloft, their faces a mixture of exhilaration and terror. Other voices joined, a chorus of liberty, echoing through the stunned chamber, attempting to transform a brutal murder into a glorious act of Republican restoration. But the cry felt hollow, fragile against the enormity of what had transpired. The remaining senators, not part of the conspiracy, stared in horrified disbelief. Many bolted, their senses overwhelmed by the sheer audacity and savagery of the assassination. Panic began to ripple. This was not the triumphant declaration the conspirators had envisioned. There was no immediate cheer, no wave of popular acclaim for their newfound freedom. Only fear, confusion, and a profound, chilling uncertainty. The conspirators, still clutching their bloodied weapons, then made their way out of the Senate, expecting to be met by throngs of grateful citizens ready to embrace their deliverance. Their exit was a desperate march, not a procession. Yet, as they emerged into the Roman Forum, the scene was far from what they had anticipated. The news, though not yet fully understood, had already begun to spread like a venomous contagion. Whispers turned to shouts, and shouts to screams. The bustling heart of Rome, usually alive with commerce and political debate, dissolved into an instant maelstrom of fear. Shops were slammed shut, vendors abandoned their stalls, citizens, bewildered and terrified, scattered in every direction. The sudden, violent end of a colossal figure like Caesar shattered the fragile sense of stability Rome had only just begun to regain after years of civil strife. Caesar's loyal veterans, the backbone of his legions, stationed near the Forum, were caught entirely off guard. Their initial reaction was one of stunned paralysis. Then a slow, burning anger began to ignite. They stood, bewildered, their weapons still sheathed, unable to comprehend the unthinkable act that had just unfolded. The protector of their future, the general they had followed through countless campaigns, was gone. The conspirators, led by Brutus, attempted to address the fleeing populace from the rostra. Their impassioned pleas for liberty fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the rising tide of fear and outright panic. No jubilant crowds hailed them as liberators. Instead, the streets emptied, leaving them exposed and isolated. The people saw not saviors, but men of violence who had plunged Rome into an unknown, terrifying future. This immediate lack of popular support was a critical miscalculation in the conspirators' grand strategy. They had planned the murder with precision, but had entirely neglected the chaotic aftermath and public sentiment. Rome, the great city, now held its breath. A vast, complex organism suddenly gripped by a mortal illness. The political vacuum was absolute, terrifying in its implications for every citizen, from plebeian to patrician. Who now commanded the legions? Who held the reins of power? The answers were as elusive as the smoke rising from a distant altar, and the uncertainty was a heavier burden than any tyrant's rule. The Republic, supposedly restored, now teetered precariously on the precipice of yet another devastating civil war. The ghosts of Marius and Sulla, of Pompey and Caesar, seemed to stir once more. Families huddled in their homes, locking their doors, fearing the inevitable eruption of vengeance and factional violence. The city's heartbeat had become a frantic drum of dread. Caesar's closest allies, particularly Mark Antony and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, initially found themselves in a perilous position, surrounded by a city gripped by conspiracy and fear. Their immediate movements were cautious, strategic. They understood the gravity of the situation, recognizing that a single rash move could tip Rome into irredeemable chaos. The moment called for calculated restraint, even as their hearts burned for retribution. The conspirators eventually retreated to the fortified capital, a traditional sanctuary. From its heights, they hoped to rally support, to solidify their position, and to interpret the public's silence as agreement. But the silence was not agreement. It was shock. It was the numbing realization that the bedrock of their world had been violently shaken. The meticulous order Caesar had imposed was instantly undone. Expert analysis of historical records indicates the assassination was a tactical success for the conspirators, but a strategic catastrophe. They had removed the man, but not the legacy, nor the popular will that empowered him. The initial shock paved the way for a deeper, more profound struggle for Rome's soul. The immediate aftermath was a testament to the unpredictable nature of power and the fickle heart of the populace. This chaotic unfolding, captured vividly by ancient historians, reveals the delicate balance of Roman politics. One man's fall instantly created a chasm, threatening to swallow the entire republic. The city, known for its resilience and might, suddenly felt vulnerable, exposed. Every Roman, regardless of status, now faced an existential question. What would become of them? The assassination was not the end of a tyranny, but the violent beginning of a new, unforeseen chapter of conflict. The blade had struck, but its reverberations were only just beginning to shake the foundations of the world. The conspirators' cry of liberty would soon be met by another, more powerful echo, the call for vengeance. Rome, having held its breath, would soon exhale in a tempest of war. The stage was set, not for peace, but for the dramatic and bloody consequences that would redefine the very nature of Rome and its vast empire. The Ides of March had claimed a life, but threatened millions. This brutal act was a seismic event, its aftershocks destined to reshape the geopolitical landscape for generations. The Roman Republic was in free fall, and the world watched, aghast. The ultimate price of ambition, power, and betrayal had only just begun to be paid. The daggers that struck down Julius Caesar on the Ides of March were intended to restore the Roman Republic, but they instead initiated its long, agonizing death throes. This act of violent defiance plunged Rome into a maelstrom of political instability and unprecedented bloodshed, a grim legacy for an ambition born of freedom. The conspirators, led by Brutus and Cassius, fundamentally misjudged the temper of the Roman populace, who largely mourned Caesar rather than celebrated his demise. Their naive belief that liberty would naturally prevail without a powerful hand to guide the state proved catastrophic in the immediate aftermath. Chaos reigned, and a dangerous power vacuum opened, threatening to consume the very foundations of Roman society. Into this void stepped Mark Antony, Caesar's trusted general and consul, a man whose ambition matched his military prowess. Antony seized the narrative, expertly leveraging Caesar's will and the emotional spectacle of his public funeral to ignite the fury of the Roman masses. He painted the conspirators as tyrants, betrayers of a beloved leader, turning public opinion decisively against them and forcing their retreat from Rome. The Senate, caught between condemning the assassins as murderers and honoring them as liberators, found itself paralyzed, ultimately failing to assert control. Just as the dust settled, another figure emerged from the shadows: Gaius Octavius, Caesar's young adopted heir, a mere 18 years old. Octavian, with an uncanny political acumen for his age, arrived in Rome, demanding his inheritance and declaring himself Caesar's true successor. His claim challenged Antony's growing power directly, setting the stage for a new, bitter rivalry that would define the coming years. This unexpected challenger possessed an undeniable legitimacy through Caesar's will, a document that reshaped the destiny of Rome. The initial conflict between Antony and Octavian soon spiraled into open warfare, dividing legions and senators alike. Yet, recognizing the immense power held by Caesar's legions, these two rivals, along with Lepidus, formed the Second Triumvirate in 43 BCE. This uneasy alliance was a stark, brutal departure from the previous informal triumvirate, established with formal legal authority to restore order. Their first objective was merciless: hunt down and eliminate Caesar's assassins, exacting a chilling retribution that became infamous. The prescriptions that followed were a systematic purge, resulting in the deaths of thousands of Romans, including the orator Cicero, a fierce critic. This era of state-sanctioned murder solidified the triumvirate's control, yet it also sowed deeper seeds of fear and distrust within the Republic. The military confrontation culminated in the two battles of Philippi in 42 BCE, fought in modern-day Greece. Here, the forces of the triumvirate clashed with the combined armies of Brutus and Cassius, the architect conspirators. Expert military analysis reveals the triumvir's superior strategic coordination, and the overwhelming loyalty of Caesar's veterans proved decisive. With the defeat and suicides of Brutus and Cassius, the last bastions of Republican ideals were brutally extinguished on the battlefield. This victory, however, did not bring lasting peace. It merely cleared the path for the inevitable power struggle among the triumvirs themselves. Lepidus was soon marginalized, leaving Octavian and Antony as the sole contenders for supreme rule, each commanding vast resources and loyal armies. Their rivalry intensified, fueled by personal ambition, political maneuvering, and a strategic division of the Roman world between East and West. Antony, based in the East, became entangled with Cleopatra VII of Egypt, a relationship that Octavian masterfully exploited for propaganda. Octavian portrayed Antony as a decadent Eastern despot, betraying Roman values for a foreign queen, stoking widespread Roman fears. This narrative culminated in the final, decisive naval engagement, the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, off the coast of Greece. Actium was a strategic masterpiece for Octavian, whose forces decisively crushed Antony and Cleopatra's combined fleets, shattering their power. Their subsequent suicides marked the definitive end of the Republic's armed defenders and removed the last formidable challenge to Octavian. The betrayal on the Ides of March, intended to save the Republic, had ironically led to its ultimate violent destruction. Octavian, now unchallenged, meticulously consolidated his power, adopting the title of Augustus and ushering in the Roman Empire. This transition fundamentally altered Western civilization, establishing a model of imperial governance that would endure for centuries. The legacy of Caesar's assassination is a profound study in unintended consequences, revealing how the pursuit of liberty can paradoxically pave the way for absolute power. The Ides of March, forever etched in the annals of history, remains a stark testament to the fragility of power and the brutal cost of ambition in ancient Rome. Caesar, a visionary leader and military genius, sought to forge a new destiny for Rome, perhaps even at the expense of its venerable republican traditions. Yet, his assassins, believing themselves saviors of liberty, struck down a man they saw as a tyrant, desperate to preserve a dying republic. This paradox lies at the heart of the betrayal. An act intended to save freedom ultimately paved the way for an empire. The echoes of that betrayal resonated through generations, shaping the destiny of Rome and profoundly influencing subsequent political thought for millennia. It stands as a timeless lesson on the corrupting allure of absolute power and the perilous tightrope walk of leadership. The relentless march of history, however, cared little for individual motives, pushing Rome toward an imperial future regardless. The Republic's foundations were already crumbling. Caesar's assassination merely accelerated its inevitable transformation into an autocratic state. We are left to ponder the complex moral calculus of those fateful daggers, questioning where true liberty truly resides. If you found this epic analysis compelling, subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the dramatic turning points of history.